Hello, everyone, and welcome to Connected with Jen and Shannon, where storytelling meets transformation. I'm Shannon, a communications trainer and coach.
And I'm Jen, a speech-language pathologist and academic. Here's where leaders in neuroscience, spirituality, philosophy, and the arts come together to share personal stories and powerful strategies for connection and reimagine what it means to be fully human.
All right, everyone, we are so excited to bring on today's guest, Donnie MacLurcan, co-founder of the Post-Growth Institute, a global network working to create well-being beyond the limits of endless growth.
Donnie is also a social entrepreneur, an organizational consultant. Donnie poses a really interesting question. He asks, what do our bodies tell us about the economy and our culture? The answer is a lot. So Donnie tells us we make a lot of economic decisions intuitively from the gut. And living in this fast-paced world, a lot of those intuitive and gut-based decisions are based in fear and stress and disassociation. So moving so quickly through this world sometimes doesn't lead to the best decisions.
So true, Jen. And what I love is how he focuses on systems that circulate value and care. From my many years of working in healthcare, I can tell you, if we prioritized value and care over the bottom line, everything would change in our healthcare system.
That's something really important to think about, Shannon. It reminds me of another quote that Donnie was bringing up in this interview by his friend, Bayo Akamolafe. The quote goes like this: times are urgent. We need to slow down. And if we slowed down in this fast-paced world, I would imagine value and care would really rise to the surface.
I love that so much because it's easy to get stuck in our heads, right? Especially when things feel uncertain. Donnie brings us back to the body, which is a powerful anchor, right? He describes this grounding technique that kind of stops you in your tracks. It's called stop and drop, and it's basically just that. But what it does is it allows you to create space to breathe and notice what's going on right in front of you. The thing is it's a beautiful reminder that our bodies can sometimes sense the future long before our minds catch up.
And if we're using this strategy, we're not living our lives in reaction to others, to the economy, or to our circumstances. Instead, we're living our lives in relation to others. Now, that's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is. So wherever you are right now, walking, driving, journaling, take a deep breath and listen to this beautiful conversation.
So we now welcome our next guest, Donnie MacLurcan. We're so glad you're here.
Feeling lost in the noise of social media? Inspo cuts through the clutter, connecting you directly with real insights from real experts and industry leaders. It's a new social network dedicated to knowledge sharing, industry insights, and thought leadership. Get the latest from top minds in your field, or build your own thought leadership portfolio on Inspo. Already trusted by thousands of professionals worldwide, be part of the conversation and download Inspo Experts today on the App Store or visit www.inspo.expert.
Welcome, Donnie. We are so grateful to have you on the podcast. We have so many questions, so much to ask you. Can we start a little bit with your bio? We want to learn a lot more about the Post-Growth Institute, social entrepreneurship, and your work.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Shannon. Great to be here with you both and with your listeners. The Post-Growth Institute has been around for 15 years now, and it begins from this shared understanding that we have, in fact, all of us in our bodies, of understanding that there are limits to how much we can grow on a finite planet. For many of us in the organization, it started, I think, with environmental sustainability and that angle, and has extended to understanding that we live in a world that has limited resources, that has systems that require circulation of carbon, nitrogen, these sorts of things, just like our body as a living system requires things circulate. And so our institute is really looking at what would it look and feel like to live in a post-growth system? Where is that already showing up in our lives and world already? And then how do we actually act as systems change agents, even in individual capacities? So that's a bit about the Institute. My own work, yes, has taken me on a journey, often linked through explorations around the human body itself. My undergraduate degree was in human movement studies, so understanding how our bodies move in space and time. And ultimately, has taken me on a journey where, though I'm not a trained economist, my economic work over the last 15, 20 years has been grounded in a space of what do our bodies have to tell us about economic systems? And interestingly, the answer is a lot.
Right. I remember reading, your website is phenomenal and the writings are really informative. Reading something about how we make a lot of our financial decisions very intuitively, right? We feel into a lot of these decisions. We think that we're making logical and reasoning based decisions, but it's really this intuition. So how can we go about making some of those decisions responsibly if we're living in this world, right? Like we want to jump right into it. We're living in this poly crisis, and a lot of what I'm operating on is fear, and a lot of the decisions I'm making are based around fear. Then how do I start to make these good economic decisions if that's where it's all coming from?
Yeah, it's a great point, Jen, because I think one of the things that happens in the kinds of systems that all of us are living in to different extents, right? There's different levels of pressure that people are feeling. But I think throughout the world, people are consistently living with greater amounts of stress. And what happens with stress is that it moves us often into a disassociated state. The ability to slow down, to reflect on what you're feeling in any given moment, whether that's in the supermarket, whether that's looking after your kids if you have them, whether that's making decisions about your future if you're working in the formal market place in terms of jobs that you might take on, these sorts of things. So often they're rushed. They're decisions that aren't even decisions sometimes. Most commonly, people these days, in spite of the appearance of choice, so many people are forced through pressures to work more, to move faster, to not even get to participate in decision making, just be a yes person, often because of the ways that power is held in organizations, in businesses, in government, for example. And I think there's a disempowering aspect that gets reinforced through that process, such that the decision making that you're asking about isn't even on the table, right? How can you make decisions about what you know in your body if you're not even having the spaciousness to feel your body? It's why I think so many people have turned to forms like mindfulness, etc., as a counter response to the oppressive experience of a system that's never enough, never fast enough, and wants you to actually stay in a space of dysregulation.
Donnie, how on earth do you stay grounded in these principles, right? When the world seems like we're going off the cliff?
Well, definitely there's aspects of my own way of staying grounding in terms of making time for certain practices. But more than that, I would say, and we might talk about this a little later, a technique that I was introduced to in ACT circles, and that's just a simple one of stop and drop, right? Just stopping what you're doing and dropping in your body, dropping your chin, for example, dropping your eye gaze, to signal to the body that you're actually wanting to take a moment to check in. And I think that there can be a sense in some spaces that, particularly on the back of things like mindfulness, where I see a lot of people dedicating a set amount of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Oh, I meditate 30 minutes a day, these sorts of things. And I think that for some people, that's like out of reach, not just in terms of a habit, but also in terms of the availability of time, right? If you're a single mum with 3 kids, the idea of you having 30 minutes available in a day is unlikely to do a kind of meditative practice. And so what I've learned to keep me grounded is to integrate that stop and drop practice regularly, and through habit that has become something that probably I do a few hundred times a day. I'll do it on this interview. I'll take a moment, I'll stop, I'll drop, and I'll just notice, is my mind running ahead of my body, for example? Am I able to have this interview with you and stay connected to what I'm feeling in any given moment?
Beautiful, Donnie. Thank you so much for that. So tell us a little bit about what brought you here to this moment in time. Was there something that really transformed the way you see the world, the way you see the universe?
Yeah, I've been pondering this question a lot, actually, and I'm not sure. I guess I would see life as a tapestry of opportunities for transformative experience. And for myself, there's been many, 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 many that all weave in a particular way. But one thing that comes to me is it was a little counterintuitive in a sense, because it's not the event itself that was transformative. It was the reflection on the event that was transformative. And it was maybe 20 years ago. And my partner at the time bought me a skydiving experience. And I'm someone who has historically been extremely scared of heights. So the thought of jumping out of a plane was certainly not one that was appealing. But I guess there was a little bit of the pressure there, and I said yes. So I went ahead with it. And in the week before that, and I had spent time doing extreme sports and a lot of work with my physiology training around visualization, these sorts of things. And so I spent the week leading up to jumping out of a plane at 14,000 feet, visualizing myself doing that very calmly. Well, I arrived at Camden Airport, just south of Sydney in Australia, and I got the pack strapped on, and I got into this plane with 12 other people who were very noticeably nervous about the experience. And I wasn't at this stage. And we sat down, you've got your tandem instructor who's sitting bound to you. And we're going up in this plane, and I'm watching my inner landscape, and I'm actually surprisingly calm. I'm actually seeing the clouds outside of this plane and thinking, wow, I'd like to get up. And so I asked, could I stand up? And the person says, no, you're not allowed to stand up. And so I was like really enjoying the plane trip itself and not getting nervous about what was coming next. But I thought that's going to change, right? Like the moment they open the back of the plane and like people start jumping. And sure enough, a few seconds later, the plane back door goes down and you see everybody lining up in their partners, etc. And I decided at that moment to put my fingers to my neck and check, how is my heart rate? And it was 80 beats per minute, right? Which is not signaling for me that I'm in a state of like nervousness or, rapid heartbeat. And so I jumped out of the plane. And the most surprising thing happened, and I had to fake my answer to this when I landed because my partner at the time was asking me, like, how was it? How was it? And actually we got, they pulled the parachute and the instructor's like, that was amazing. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, yeah. And the reality was I didn't get any rush at all. I didn't feel anything. Yeah, I had totally psyched myself into a space of disconnection from the normal natural response, which would be fear, would be adrenaline, etc. And I reflected on that for many years, and I think it helped me continue a practice around and an interest in embodiment, because what it helped me understand, and even just recently, I think, is that it's not only that we get forced into these spaces of disconnection, but that we can also control ourselves in ways that can often disconnect, right? We can actively move into disembodied states. The mind can be very, very powerful. And so what this brings up for me is that in this process of returning to our bodies, in this process of connecting with how we're feeling, noticing what's happening in our bodies, having our bodies as guides for our daily life and for the way that we perceive the world, that requires a letting go of the control. It's not just let me practice, being more in my body. You have to actually let go of the parts that want to intellectualize things, that want to rationalize, that want to analyze, right? Just be totally in this disconnected state. And that's interesting, right? That there's a letting go that's associated with like moving beyond a patriarchal system, that there's aspects that we have to surrender to, knowing that it's going to be scary to surrender to something that has been like, if the way that you go through the world is to understand it all, is to know everything about every part, then it's going to be probably quite frightening to let go of that and to explore other ways of knowing and being in that process.
One thing I'm thinking about, Donnie, too, is what you were sharing around uncertainty. It makes me recall something that I'd read earlier. We as humans hate uncertainty. We hate it even more than bad news. So I think there's some research around, we almost would prefer a negative diagnosis to an uncertain diagnosis because we don't like the not knowing. And this makes me think a little bit about your work and speaking about, because you're looking to a future that is uncertain, right? We need to prepare ourselves in a space where we can't plan ahead for what things might look like. But if we trust our bodies and we trust ourselves, we can know that we can move into a better space, but an uncertain space, which maybe makes us uncomfortable. And another thing that I'm thinking about is a quote that I'm probably massacring from Adrienne Marie Brown of, small is all, right? If we can embody and recognize what we truly are feeling in the moment and embrace that, can we then also embody our community? Can we embody a larger system and embrace and care for that in the same way that we would for ourselves? Those are the two thoughts that came up when you were speaking, and I don't know if that resonates at all with you, Don.
Well, it does, Jen. This idea that if you are in your body, you can connect with the broader body of, whether that's a populace, whether that's the earth, whether that's beyond, I think is well, documented, well understood in particular spaces. But it's something that still remains theoretical for a lot of people. The beautiful thing about connecting with, in my own journey with my own body, is I grew up believing in magic, right? Like lots of kids do. The idea that magic exists, and then I went through the kind of processes that lots of us are conditioned in terms of like disconnecting from that magic, in terms of realizing that there's science, there's rationalism, all of these pieces. And it wasn't until maybe my early 20s that I really reconnected with that magic. And by that magic, what I mean is even the practice of, if I have a question that I'm sitting with, that uncertainty that you mentioned, and what is it that I want to know about something? And then I ask myself that question, and then I sit in my body with that question. I just hold that question. It's pretty amazing, especially if one can let go of the control of like, well, it's not coming, and actually move through that stage of trying to control a process and just relax into it. It's pretty amazing what the body can actually tell you in response to these questions. And one of the things that I sense that a lot of people who are able to connect with the body, have the spaciousness and the practices to connect with their body, discover, is that sense of interconnection, right? Is that sense that your own body has like its own limits. I think here of like Jill Bolt Taylor's work around what she discovered as a neuroscientist when she lost half of capacity through hemispheric stroke, right? Like what happened in that experience where she was in the hospital from memory, and she could sense, just like animals, dogs in particular, the intention that someone had. She couldn't understand. She didn't have the analytical capacity to understand what someone was saying, etc. But she could sense whether they were coming from a space of love, fear, anger, frustration, etc. But she also understood that because she didn't feel her body as the end of her embodied experience, right? There wasn't this sense that my body ends here and therefore that's all I am, as just this person in this form. That interconnectedness that we know, when we're able to reconnect with this understanding we know exists, that then inspires that empathy, inspires also awareness about the impacts of our daily life, of our complicity in systems, as well as the fact that we were born into systems that we didn't have control over the creation of, etc. And so just compassion associated, as well as the empathy, self-compassion and empathy for others.
This makes me think Thank you for that so much. This makes me think a lot about the relational field, right? This that I'm just learning about this notion that when we are communicating and connecting, we're creating this field between us that's shared. And I think we don't allow enough opportunities in this world that we're living in now for us to read into the field, to allow the field to exist in the first place, right? Because I think very often we're not in a space where we are deeply connecting, as I wish that we could and would. But then reading into it and allowing, as you're mentioning, allowing ourselves to recognize what's actually happening there.
Yeah, you'll hear a lot of talk in certain spheres around the need to move beyond transactionality to relationality. And for me, what that means is that it's not just that we don't create these experiences, it's that we're in a system that forces us away from those possibilities, and it requires intentional effort and people working on changing systems and creating spaces for others, facilitating experiences, right? Not everyone can actively move into more relational ways of being if you've just got to get the bills paid, if you've got to get the kids to school, these sorts of things. And so it's opportunities, especially for people who are facilitators of experiences, whether that's lawyers in mediation, for example, whether that's teachers in formal settings, whether that's parents in homes, whether that's people working in community development work itself, to think about how do we set people up for that deeper relationship that you're speaking of there, Jen. And one of the things that I've learned through particularly my work with the Post Growth Institute is that what's needed for people to step into that relationality, or the vulnerability that Brene Brown speaks of, for example, or the relationality that we see in indigenous and rooted cultures throughout the world, where that collectivism is centered, where the family in the extended forms is centered, where others are centered in terms of relationship, is that it requires some form of structure, especially for people who are dysregulated. You have to have moments where people can feel safe. So, for example, if you're working in an organization and you have a group that's meeting together to discuss or explore a topic, to name at the beginning, like, I want to check in around time constraints, right? There'll be an agenda coming in a moment, right? Something that gives you a sense of a structure. These little tweaks, these important pieces, are actually ways to help co-regulate individuals in the space, because you're moving into the uncertainty that you mentioned before, right? You're moving into a space where, well, what happens if this meeting goes 2 hours? I've got to, be in another meeting at this time, etc. And if you start in dysregulated states, you're not going to have the most productive, deep, rich relational conversations, right? So the idea that we set up experiences for relationality through some form of structure that alleviates anxiety for some people in the space is something that might be helpful and practical for those listening.
Thanks, Donnie. I think one thing that we can just kind of try to basically understand, what is a post growth society? What is it? Right now we are in a society where more is better, right? We just want to accumulate. We strive for materialistic things. So is there hope? Are there some cracks in this narrative that we can kind of peel out to focus on and maybe start to tell ourselves a different story about what's going on in the economic space?
Absolutely. There always has been. And what I would say is I would answer this question by way of this embodied experiment that we've done before together. This piece where you imagine. In fact, I invite people listening right now to grab a piece of paper and a pen and go through this a little bit as we go. And if you need to, you can pause the recording because I'll move a little more quickly than I usually would. And you will start by drawing a line down the center of your page. And in the top right, write the word future. And in the top left, write the word present. And then you're going to imagine, we're going to start on the right-hand side. Imagine what a future that's working for everyone and everything looks like, an economy that's working for everyone and everything, human and non-human species alike. Just imagine that for a moment. And when you've connected with some kind of imagery, drop down into your body, right? Give yourself an opportunity to feel it. How does it feel in that economy that's working for everyone and everything? And when you've connected with that feeling, with your eyes open, draw a symbol or a shape without lifting your pen that represents how it feels in that economy. Once you've done that, we move to the left-hand side. How does the present economy feel? And again, once you've drawn something without lifting your pen, we have a situation, having done this experiment for 13 years across, well, more than 10,000 people and differences of all kinds. There's a commonality in response to your question, Shannon. There's a commonality of experience. People draw one of 5 symbols or shapes for the future, one of 5 symbols or shapes for the present, or a close variation or combination. So for the future, people typically draw a circle, an infinity symbol, a spiral, a nodule, a blob, or a heart. And for the present, people typically draw a jagged line, an isosceles triangle, a downward arrow, a rectangle, or a mess of lines. And so what we see here is that we know in our bodies that for a system to work, you have to have it built on non-linearity, right? All of those images for the future are all non-linear. They're all circular. They've got curves, etc. And we also all know that the present is built on linearity. So what is post-growth? Post-growth is moving beyond a system of linearity. How do we get the spaciousness? How do we have a system where I'm not getting constantly bombarded with advertisements about how I don't have enough, I'm not enough, etc., but I can actually have the spaciousness to grow in a way that I'm meant to without that kind of undue pressure? And the beautiful thing, to answer your question again, Shannon, is that there are already so many forms of that circulation, right? Whether it's in the family unit and the way that families circulate. I always think of this example and it makes people laugh. If you have kids, it's not like if your kids leave home at some point, you turn to them and say, here's the bill, right? Like, there's no, it would be a big bill for a lot of people. And so there's these understood principles of reciprocity, of circulation, etc. And to your point earlier, Jen, about when you're being in your own body, recognizing that there's, to Adrienne Maree Brown's quote, other forms of embodiment that you can connect with. What we're talking about here is how do you connect those things in your body of of course I'm going to share with XYZ, when you make it larger and you give structure, right? This isn't just about some kind of communistic society where everyone's sharing everything constantly. No, how do you have a structured market economy where money and power circulates? And here's the last piece of this answer, Shannon, is that such an economy already exists. It's just hidden. We don't think of, for example, there are alternative ways of living and being. I live here in Argentina, and it's amazing to see in this small town of 25,000 people. I'm on a WhatsApp group that has a cap of 1,250, right? There would be way more people than 1,250 on this group if possible. It's always maxed out. And this group is a microeconomy group. People are just saying what they're offering and what they're needing in terms of things they want to trade. It gets over 600, 700 posts every day, right? And there's so many examples of that. So many of those things have been happening and continue to happen. What that means is that we've now got a lot of feedback loops, right? But also we have social pressures that are now in feedback loops where it's going to take a long time. Think about the trauma that is laden in people's bodies when they grow up in certain conditions, right? These things can't be changed just like that with a fantastic program from the government or a not-for-profit doing amazing work or communities binding together to really support people. There's lots we can do. If you don't have the imagination or the vision to be able to present, of course you're going to default to it comes back to the certainty piece, Jen, that you mentioned at the beginning, right? So what are people going to do? They're going to present certainty. This will do this. This will do this, even though we know that in a complex system, saying you do something doesn't always mean that this results in this. And this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, right? Vayokomolofe speaks about this, the mythopoetic philosophy. He talks about the times are urgent. We need to slow down, right? A notion from his Yoruba traditions. And that's exactly what I'd say is that the more we can slow down, ironically, the more we'll be able to address, right? Not from a space of intellectual, fear-based, this is what we should do, but actually, this is what my body's telling me to do, which often is counterintuitive, right? So you have to push against the grain because your body's telling you something, this doesn't feel right, etc. And the rest of everyone is programmed to be like, no, this is exactly the way we should go. And you have to actually stand true, stand strong in what you know in your body to assist in those smoother transitions, Shannon, to ameliorate some of the stress and strains that are going to inevitably continue.
Donnie, so what I'm hearing, right, is the way we slow down is to drop into the body, as you were mentioning earlier, and and listen. Like this is what some call intuition, right? And truly listen. And so originally I was going to ask you before you got to that, well, how do we slow down? And that is it. There maybe isn't an answer to slowing down. The answer is within us. The answer is to slow down and listen. And then what the answer will come from the body. Am I hearing you correctly there?
Yeah, I would agree with aspects of that. I would say that given everybody's different life circumstances, there can be different ways to prompt the slowing down. For example, for some, it might need to be more ritualistic, like this is my moment in the day where I'm going to slow down, as I mentioned earlier, and um, and others don't have that privilege, and so there are different habits, practices, etc. Whether it's having reminders that allow you to break out of like a cycle of just moving at a million miles per hour, through to you know for me, for example, one of the spaces where I've had um, the strongest experience of slowing down is in therapy over the last 30 years, right? Like having someone hold the space and then push me to actually work through my bullshit and to actually like take on my own stuff and take ownership and with compassion for the things that I'm bringing into this world in terms of my own trauma. And that in itself, right? Like some of those trauma loops that often play out in a mental process, right? That's something that therapy is often a really, really helpful. In other words, it's not just on ourselves to fully do this work of slowing down. We need, as I mentioned at the beginning, we need people who help facilitate and create the structure to assist us. And maybe that structure is, simply listening to a podcast like this and going, oh, okay, that gives me a container to stop and drop. Okay, I'm going to try that technique. I don't really know what it means, but stop. I'm going to stop. I'm going to drop. What am I dropping? Well, I might just even drop the pen in my hand, the phone in my hand, etc. Right? Like it can be any kind of interpretation. And I think all of these different ways into this um, offer something, offer something. The goal is always the same. It's to believing that there is actually more to this world than just what we're told, what we read, what we hear, to actually explore an inner landscape. And this is actually an important point. I encounter a lot of people who believe that, and this is different to my own belief, that being in the body, doing some kind of meditative practice is about stilling the body. For me, that's not the case. For me, what I mean by embodiment is stilling the exterior so that you can actually notice all the activity that's happening on the interior. Not trying to go quiet on the interior, but actually trying to listen to what's happening that's drowned out by all of the noise in the exterior.
Jen and I often talk about inner work for outer change. And that's kind of what this reminds me of when we have a moment to slow down and reflect what's really going on inside.
And one word and phrase that you were using, Donnie, was listening, right? Shannon and I both work in communication fields, And one piece that's very often lost, right? When we think about communication, it's always like talking out, sending things out into the world. But really, what we need to be spending a lot of our time doing is listening. And so I think very often listening to others, but I love that you were sharing about listening internally.
Yeah.
And that's just such an
I'd even
important point.
say that both of those can be connected, right? So, for example, when I'm listening to you both say things, reflect on things, ask questions, I'm then immediately listening to or as it's happening, how is my body feeling in that process, right? So, and even if we were to take this through to like the specific field that you're both in terms of communications, let's say that I'm sending out like an email to or a newsletter to supporters of some cause, or if I'm in marketing, just people who are on my list. The moment that I write that subject line, for example, or that copy, noticing as I reread it or as I hit send or whatever it is, how's it landing in my body? And the amazing thing, I mean, there's a lot of, I'm going down a very specific angle here, but I'll make sure to bring it back. There's a lot of thought in the comms and marketing space around like, who's your audience, understanding your audience and doing, A/B testing, these sorts of bits and pieces that some of your audience might be familiar with. And yet, what I've found throughout the years and doing a lot of work in comms, especially through the Post Growth Institute, the incredibleness of what you can actually sense, even though you are not in all of your audience's bodies. You don't know your demographic in and out at all. You might have data that gives you a sense of who you're speaking to, but you don't ultimately know who's on your list, all of them, and the lives they've lived at all. You can. You can actually feel into, especially in a collective process with more than one person, where you create sort of a field of experience where you can speak to what's happening for each of you. I've been in so many comms meetings where someone will say something and then everyone goes, yes, right? And these are people who have different lives, etc., and everyone agrees that's it, that lands, that's the piece. That tells us something, right? Just like the drawing experiment does. There are universal truths. There are things that cut across difference culturally, racially, geographically, etc. There's a lot of difference that needs to be acknowledged, but there's also a lot of things that we share in terms of resonance around this is what feels right. And that's actually coming back to your question earlier, Shannon, about like smooth transitions and what's already here that we can work with. If you have the spaciousness to reflect on your life right now, you will notice if you were to do an inventory, and it would take too long to do a full inventory, but if you were to just reflect on what are some of the things that are actually working? Where are some spaces in my personal life, any relationship I'm in, any family life that I have, where things work? You will start to see patterns about the conditions that enable those things happening. And that's where many of us are called to help create those conditions more, to strengthen those pillars of conditions so that others can thrive in spaces with more spaciousness, with more of that structure that allows the relationality, etc.
That sounds like a world I want to live in, Donnie. Thank you for helping us imagine what this new bliss could look like. So, Donnie, are you working on anything coming up that you want to tell us about?
So we run a lot of projects at the Post Growth Institute. We have a flagship program is called the Offers and Needs Market. People can find out more at offersandneeds.com. It's a way to, in fact, I just wrote something about this yesterday, so I'm going to pull it up here because it's my best succinct explanation of an experience that is a couple of hours long that we facilitate around the world. And the Offers and Needs Market is a structured, facilitated way of remembering and practicing how to relationally be and exchange with each other in formal and informal marketplaces. So if you're interested in connecting with others in more meaningful ways and having your needs met and sharing your offers, professional and otherwise, with the world, you can check out offersandneeds.com. That's a program that will continue to expand and deepen. We've now got 430 facilitators across 40 countries, and people can check out that and see if they'd like to get involved.
All of the work you're doing gives me tremendous hope, Donnie, that there's people out in the world that are actually making sense of all this. So thank you so much. As we close, we like to ask our guests to leave us with one word or one phrase that they can take forward with them from our conversation that we had today.
Donnie, these were two words you said a lot, but you said them a couple of times and they really stuck with me. Magic and imagination. Yeah. And this is something that I really value about you in this conversation is that you bring this, right? You allow a space where we can think about the magic in the world and imagine these possibilities. I also want to share something that, you invited us to think of our own new bliss. And so interestingly, the symbol that came up for me was circular, this circular bliss rather than a linear world. And when you said, how would you be spending this life if you weren't in this space where you were always feeling like you're doing and moving in? And I felt like where I would want to be would be in community, right? Which is exactly what you're building with your needs and offerings. Building a community where I think this new bliss could exist. So I want to say thank you for that.
Well, thanks for mentioning that, Jen, and thanks for your reflections as well throughout this call, Shannon. For me, I would say linking the magic and the imagination is the wonder that emerges through going slowly, seeking to find a little more slowness, even in the things that are fast, that can open the spaciousness for that magic in imaginative ways. So my word today is slowness.
I'm going to say embodiment. Donnie, that when I think of you, I think of how you take your work and you embody it, right? You don't just speak it, you actually live it. And that's what I'm going to take with me today. So this has been really fun, Donnie. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast. We're incredibly grateful. And I'll tell our audience in the beginning of our call, we had to wait because Donnie's power was out because he's somewhere cool. Donnie, tell us where are you right now?
I live in Patagonia in Argentina. And yes, power outages are a regular part of life here throughout much of the global south.
Very grateful to have this 1 hour's time where the internet cooperated and we were able to talk to you in a really, really powerful and meaningful way. So thank you very much, Donnie. We're incredibly grateful for this.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Jen. And thanks to your listeners.
Okay, everyone, we have something really important to ask, right? Jen and Shannon are over here trying to save the world and we need your help.
This is how you can help us. Go to Spotify, go to Apple Podcasts, go to YouTube, and hit like and subscribe. And let us know what you think.
And here's the thing, we're building a community, and this is the first step.
We can't wait to see you there.